On the 1st of September 1939, German forces crossed the Polish border, beginning a war that would engulf the world for the next 6 years. As Hitler had long planned, the German attack was a blitzkrieg, a lightning attack, with the Luftwaffe bombing campaign clearing a path for the tanks and the infantry coming in behind. These tactics were so successful that Poland surrendered within a month. In accordance with the Nazi-Soviet pact, which had agreed the partition of Poland, Stalin ordered the Red Army into eastern Poland. For the Polish people, the consequences were devastating, with the SS under Heinrich Himmler relishing the order to destroy Poland as a national, cultural, and ethnic entity. While the war raged in Poland, the Soviet Union moved to expand its sphere of influence, with the Baltic states of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania soon falling under its control. Further north, the Red Army encountered fierce resistance in Finland during the Winter War before its victory in March 1940. But the war exposed serious weaknesses in the Red Army leadership after Stalin's purges of the 1930s, something that was not lost on German observers who reported back to the Führer. In the West, the declaration of war brought the phony war, and as 1939 turned into 1940, no bombs fell on London or Paris. France, though, mobilized 6 million men to strengthen the Maginot Line, the chain of fortifications built along the German frontier, while Britain sent 200,000 men to bolster defences further north. Through the first winter of the war, these men faced German soldiers across the same ground where their fathers and grandfathers had fought a generation earlier. In Britain, the delay was used to bolster the rearmament programme, while fear of the Luftwaffe led to the blackout and the evacuation of 2 million children. By the spring of 1940, with the war going very much as Hitler had planned, the cabinet in London felt pressure to take the initiative, not least to boost national confidence. As a result, the Royal Navy was sent to the Baltic to disrupt the supply of Swedish iron ore, crucial to the German war machine. In response, Hitler invaded Denmark and Norway to secure the supply chain, with a British force sent to aid Norwegian resistance, soon evacuated in early June, losing upwards of 5,000 men. This led to Neville Chamberlain's resignation, with the King inviting Winston Churchill to form a government of national unity. This included the Labour leader Clement Attlee as Lord Privy Seal before he became Deputy Prime Minister in 1942. The two worked well through the war, with Attlee administering domestic affairs while Churchill oversaw the prosecution of the war effort. On the 14th of May 1940, the war in the West began with the bombardment of Rotterdam. Soon the surrender of the Netherlands and the attack of Belgium followed, leading Britain and France to strengthen their borders with Germany and Belgium. But this largely ignored the 50-mile gap around the supposedly impenetrable Ardennes forest. Punching through weak Allied defences there, 1,200 panzer tanks poured through the forest and into northeastern France. Then the right flank turned north, reaching the Channel coast at Noyelles-sur-Mer on the Somme estuary on the 20th of May. This trapped the BEF on the Belgian border. In Paris, Marshal Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun, was recalled and appointed Deputy Prime Minister, but defeatism had paralysed the French military. As the situation worsened, Lord Gort, the commander of the British Expeditionary Force, ordered a retreat to the coast, where between the 29th of May and the 3rd of June 1940, around 320,000 British and Allied troops were evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk. Around 850 vessels, including some 250 small boats, crossed the Channel to assist in the evacuation, an effort that soon became known as the Dunkirk Spirit. It was a desperate escape from a campaign which the Wehrmacht had shown overwhelming superiority. After Dunkirk, the defeat of France was completed with the capture of Paris on the 14th of June 1940, just 6 weeks after the initial blitzkrieg. Hitler then instructed his generals to humiliate France, just as Germany had been a generation before, ordering the surrender papers to be signed in the same railway carriage in the same location used by the French in November 1918. The carriage was then taken away and burnt. Later, on the 23rd of June, Hitler made a fleeting 3-hour early morning trip to Paris to see the sights, including the Eiffel Tower and the tomb of Napoleon, a visit that was soon turned into a propaganda film distributed across Germany. Earlier that month, Italy had entered the war on Germany's side, with Mussolini hoping to benefit from Hitler's victory. Hitler assumed now that Britain would sue for peace, but when this did not happen, he ordered his generals to launch Operation Sea Lion for the invasion of Britain. In the meantime, Churchill's oratory and public appearances helped galvanize national morale, with him famously saying, during the battle for France, "We shall never surrender." He also appointed Lord Beaverbrook, the newspaper magnate, to work closely with munition workers and the TUC, soon doubling production on planes such as the Spitfire. In the late summer of 1940, Britain was not prepared for the battle to come, but it was at least beginning to get ready. Air superiority over the English Channel was crucial before any invading flotilla could be made safe, and so at the end of July 1940, Goering's Luftwaffe was ordered to take control of the skies. The Battle of Britain began with attacks on British shipping in the Channel and on the southern coastal ports, but after heavy losses there, the Luftwaffe switched to attacking RAF aerodromes across southern England and the radar stations protecting them. For 6 weeks, a pattern of daily dogfights developed above the fields of southern England. British fighters were scrambled to destroy German bombers before they could drop their ordnance, while German fighters tried to prevent this from happening. Despite German numerical superiority, the RAF was helped enormously by radar and by German fuel limits that reduced their combat time. After 6 weeks, commanders began to question whether the Luftwaffe could guarantee the air superiority they had promised. Hitler agreed, cancelling operations on the 17th of September 1940 and postponing Operation Sea Lion until the following spring. The Battle of Britain had been won, and Churchill praised the pilots, saying never in the field of human conflict was so much owed, by so many to so few. Hitler now turned to a new strategy to defeat Britain, launching the Blitz, a nighttime bombing campaign against British cities. The campaign lasted for 9 months, from September 1940 to May 1941, killing around 40,000 Britons. London endured 57 consecutive nights of bombing, 71 in total, as thousands of tons of incendiaries fell across the country. Across the Atlantic, scenes of British resilience had a powerful effect on American public opinion, where isolationism had prevailed since the First World War. President Franklin Roosevelt increasingly sided with Britain, describing the US as the arsenal of democracy. Through agreements such as the Destroyers for Bases deal in 1940 and later Lend-Lease, the US supplied Britain with vital resources, including 50 aging American destroyers to escort Atlantic convoys. As the Blitz continued, Churchill and his cabinet looked to shift the focus of the war away from British shores, launching offensives in the Atlantic and North Africa. In the attritional Battle of the Atlantic, the convoy system proved vital, aided by developments at Bletchley Park, the military's secret code-breaking centre, where the first breakthrough in deciphering the Nazis' Enigma code had come in January 1940. In North Africa, victories against Italian forces in Egypt in February 1941 raised morale amongst those at home enduring rationing and the Blitz. Italian weaknesses persuaded Hitler to send General Rommel, the Desert Fox, to Libya. His troops pushed 200 miles into Egypt, reaching El Alamein, only 70 miles from the crucial port of Alexandria. Poised for a final offensive that might have driven the British from Egypt and cut access to the Suez Canal, Rommel instead received neither the men nor the arms he needed when Hitler intensified his campaign against the Soviet Union in the summer. By the early summer of 1941, Hitler's popularity and confidence were at their peak, and he felt ready to embark on his principal war aim that had preoccupied him for most of his adult life, the acquisition of Lebensraum, living space for the German people in the East. On the 22nd of June, Operation Barbarossa was launched, the largest land invasion in history, with 79 armoured divisions and over 4 million troops pouring across the border into the USSR. Within months, German forces had captured vast areas of Soviet territory, and Nazi forces soon stood just 100 miles or so from Moscow. However, Hitler now made a fatal mistake, ordering armoured divisions approaching Moscow to sweep south and help capture Kyiv first. Only then did these forces move back to the north. As with Napoleon's march on Moscow in 1812, the Germans ignored the Russian winter, and Moscow was never to be captured. Early in October, the snows came. The German army was left exposed at the end of a supply line stretching across occupied Eastern Europe. And as winter set in, Hitler refused any tactical retreat, demanding nothing less than total victory. This was welcomed in Moscow, where a rapprochement with Japan freed up troops stationed in Siberia for a counterattack that was launched on the 6th of December 1941, just a day before Pearl Harbor. Soviet successes were swift and decisive, with more than 300,000 German soldiers killed or captured, as the full brutality of the SS-run Nazi occupation became clear. The retreat from Moscow marked the first major setback for the German army and led Hitler to assume direct military control over operations in the East. Obsessed with Lebensraum and the war in the East, Hitler spent much of the rest of the war directing operations from his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, hidden deep in the forests of eastern Prussia. As a result, nearly 80% of all the soldiers sent to the Eastern Front would lose their lives. News from the Eastern Front was overshadowed on the 7th of December 1941, when Japanese forces attacked the US Pacific Fleet at anchor at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack followed 6 months of tension, centered on an oil embargo imposed by Britain and the US. Japan instead sought to secure oil supplies by seizing the Dutch East Indies, in a move likely to provoke war with the USA. Japanese planners therefore launched a preemptive strike at Pearl Harbor, hoping it would give them a year to dominate the Pacific. Negotiations were still continuing in Washington when Japanese aircraft carriers moved to within 200 miles of the Hawaiian Islands before launching 400 aircraft. In a surprise dawn attack, much of the US Pacific Fleet was sunk, with nearly 2,500 soldiers and Marines killed, including over 1,100 aboard the USS Arizona. Crucially, no aircraft carriers were in port that morning, and the attack also failed to destroy the huge oil storage tanks at the base. Hitler and Mussolini were suitably impressed, and 4 days later declared war on the United States. The attack gave Japan naval superiority in the Pacific and Southeast Asia, and within months it had taken Guam, Hong Kong and Borneo, and most infamously Singapore in February the following year. In the months that followed Pearl Harbor, the Axis powers stood at the peak of their power, yet they now faced a new and formidable coalition, the Grand Alliance of Britain and her empire, the Soviet Union and the United States, and as the war progressed, holding on to these vast territories conquered between 1939 and early 1942 would prove to be far harder than just winning them.